When you come to our tournaments and you are judging debates, you are likely, you will be confronted with one of three types of decision-making frameworks. We have value-based frameworks, policy-based frameworks, and public policy approaches. And those correspond to the main formats of debate that we have. So a value-based framework, or is what we primarily use in Lincoln-Douglas debate. So if you've been assigned to judge a Lincoln-Douglas debate, most debates are going to come down to these value-based frameworks. And all that means is that the debaters are going to approach the debate from these three levels that are showing up on your screen right now. The first thing that they will likely do in their speech is they will talk about what it is that we care about in our society, or what we should care about in our society. They're identifying for us the guiding principles that are relevant to our society and the current debate topic. So they'll identify something like, we care about justice, we care about equality, we care about individual freedoms, we care about national security. They will name a principle. They will identify a principle for you, and they should explain to you why that principle is so incredibly important in our society, why it's something we should care about. Once they've done that, then they will offer for you an explanation of how we know when we have achieved that good thing, how we know when we have achieved the principle which we hold to be important in our society. So this is equality. That's one of the most important guiding principles in our society. This is how we know when we have achieved equality in our society. Lincoln-Douglas debaters refer to these two things as a value and a criterion. Right? The value is the principle that we care about. The criterion is the explanation of how we know when we've achieved the value. And then the third thing they will do in the debate or in their speeches is they will demonstrate how their side of the debate topic best achieves that principle. So they will provide contentions, explanation, analysis, data, statistics, research, et cetera, that connect back to the criteria or criterion that they've presented, which ultimately then shows that we achieve the principle which we hold to be important. Okay, so you can imagine then that in a value-based framework, the two debaters might have dueling or competing principles. One side identifies something like justice or human rights. The other side says that our guiding principle should be security, safety, and so forth. And so they might have different values. They will need to have, remember, vertical debate, an examination of which one of those is more important and why. They may also have clash on the national security value or the human rights value. They'll have, again, the explanation of how we know whether we've achieved justice, human rights, whatever it was, national security, and so forth. Policy-based frameworks. A policy-based framework is obviously what we use in policy debate, and the entire debate round really comes down to a couple of questions. Is change necessary, and is change desirable? In a policy debate round, the debaters have been assigned an annual debate topic. This year it's criminal justice reform, and they need to present a course of action, a proposal by the federal government on what that reform looks like. And they'll be addressing two fundamental questions. Is change desirable, is change necessary, and is change desirable? That necessary question is broken down into three pieces. First, they're identifying whether there is a problem that needs to be fixed. What is so harmful? What is problematic about the way that the criminal justice system operates today? Second, they address the question of why does that problem exist? What is it about the criminal justice system that is creating this problem? Third, they identify a potential solution for you. This is our plan to address the problem that we've identified. Once they have handled that question, then they can move into the secondary question of, is change desirable? The first level of addressing that question is to simply evaluate the proposal that they provided as it relates back to the problem that they presented. Does their plan, their proposal, their solution, does it actually reduce the problem that they cite? Do they make the world better in that area? Second, They will talk about it, they might talk about additional consequences. The affirmative might very well come in and say, hey, if we reform the criminal justice system based on equality, justice, racism, etc., there might be additional benefits as well. We might have economic benefits for our society. And then we'll talk through that. The negative might come back and say, hey, there are unintended consequences of the federal government implementing your proposal. If we take this course of action, there are necessarily things that will happen that we don't want to happen, an unintended consequence. And sometimes those unintended consequences are significant enough that we don't want to take that action. If you go back to the tobacco debate that we were talking about, right? The affirmative probably identified public health. They explained how their proposal banning tobacco products would make the world a safer place. The negative says, yeah, but the unintended consequences, we have a significant economic downturn by getting rid of an entire industry in our society. That's an unintended consequence. Or third, they might say that there are opportunity costs, that if we implement this proposal, we lose the opportunity to do something even better, right? Debaters will call that a counter plan. They'll say that this is a better proposal that we would lose the opportunity to implement if you choose the affirmative plan. And our counter proposal is actually would make the world a better place. All of these questions fundamentally come down to one overarching idea of cost-benefit analysis. A policy debate almost always comes down to the question of whether or not the proposal put forth by the affirmative leaves the world better off than it started. If the affirmative leads to more good than bad, then you as the judge are going to vote affirmative. If the proposal put forth by the affirmative is likely to lead to more bad than good, then you would vote for the negative team. It's a pretty simple and straightforward process, a simple and straightforward question. That's what the debaters should be coming back to in a policy-based framework. Do we leave the world better off or not? You will hear different argument types in policy debate. Admittedly, it is probably the most technical, not probably, it is the most technical of all of the debate formats. And the debaters will bring in several different policy debate argument types, such as a problem and a solution. That's what you were just looking at on the previous screen, problem solution. And that's an affirmative case. They might debate the rules of the game. A lot of times I have community members come back to me and say, hey, I think that a team may have broken a rule, and I don't know if I need to, this is when I was a league director, I think a team broke a rule and I don't know if they need to be kicked out of the tournament or not. That's not what these rule of the game arguments are. One of the interesting things about debate formats, especially policy debate format, is that debaters get to debate over the rules of the game sometimes. And so they will have debates about, hey, you did not present an affirmative case which falls within the boundaries of this year's debate topic, right? If they're given the resolution, the United States federal government should ban tobacco products, and they come in and they say all governments around the world should ban tobacco products, or if they say we should ban, I don't know, Monster energy drinks, that would be outside the rules of the game. They violated a rule of the game, and they would have a debate on whether or not violating the rule of the game leaves the world better off or worse off, whether the rule of the game was violated at all, and so forth. So it's still using cost-benefit analysis when they have those types of debates. They might engage in practice of contravention, which is a case turn. They're saying, hey, your goal was to promote public health, but you actually undermine public health. Your proposal was designed to solve structural racism within the criminal justice system, but the proposal that you present actually makes racism worse, or makes inequality worse, and so forth. Unintended consequences, I talked about that on the previous slide, those disadvantages, the economic repercussions, the political ramifications that lead to changes in our foreign policy, and so forth, which can play out in ways that maybe we want to not act because of the concern about those unintended consequences, the alternative policies like counterplans, and then most recently in the debate world, we've started to introduce critiques, which are simply alternative perspectives, other ways of thinking and speaking and acting, methodologies in our research, and so forth. Those debates can be the most confusing for judges when students are talking about critical race theory and things like that, that we're not necessarily sure what the students are talking about. But at the end of the day, remember a couple of things. One, they should be speaking to you. So if they're using terms or sentence structures that just don't make sense, that's probably on the debater, not on you. It's not your job to try and to work incredibly hard to understand everything that they're saying. Debaters are supposed to keep things simple and speak to their audience. But second, even if they're talking about these alternative perspectives, they're still presenting it in terms of what leaves us better off. The approach, the way of thinking that my opponents are using is harmful, and we have an alternative way of thinking which would actually leave the world better off. So it's still, change is desirable, cost-benefit analysis. You leave the world better or worse, and that guides your decision-making as a judge. Four elements of policy arguments. So all of those are going to come down to a couple of things. One, they're going to make a statement of how things are now or how they're assumed to be. This is what the world looks like. That's either good or it's bad, right? The world right now has a justice system that looks like this. That causes bad things. Therefore, we change society. We offer a proposed plan. And then that either makes things better or worse. All of those arguments on the previous slide, procedural arguments, counter plans, critiques, every single one of them comes back to these four elements. A statement of how things are, whether that's good or bad, the change we want to see or that happened, and how that leaves us either better off or worse off. If you think about any argument that debaters present in a policy debate round, it's probably going to come back to these four levels of analysis. So when we say that policy debate is the more complex of the formats, if you take a step back and kind of look at the big picture, it all comes back to these four elements, and it's actually relatively simple and straightforward to evaluate. And then there's public policy approaches, and this would be public forum. A public policy approach can be either value-based or policy-based frameworks in terms of the argumentation that they bring to the table. They might include both, but the emphasis is on public discourse. Speaking to the common person, speaking to the everyday individual, and making sure that our persuasive rhetorical strategies are geared towards everyday language and communication. The reality is public policy, and value-based frameworks, any of the formats can actually shift over to one of these other frameworks. The debaters would need to make an effort of explaining why they're doing that, most likely. But that is the simple idea of what each of these are. Some quick comparisons. Policy debate. Policy debate as a format, like I said, is the most technical. If you wanted to make a comparison to the real world, so to speak, you would think about the types of debates you would imagine different think tanks having or research institutes having, right? So back in January, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention was, well, still, but they were becoming aware back in January of a virus outbreak in China and determining how concerning this should be for us, how alarming it should be for us, what our solutions should be for it, and so forth, right? Thinking about how they're going to address that issue. Those are the complex, in the weeds type of debates that you could imagine being had at the CDC or the International Panel on Climate Change, right? Scientists debating different issues about climate change, fossil fuel policy, oil policy, et cetera, and thinking through what are the effects of these, how will it change? That's the type or the level of detail that policy debaters ideally are getting into. Whereas Lincoln Douglas debaters take a big step back and they're thinking big picture, principled argumentation, right? Ideally, the ideal example of this would be what you envision political leaders may be doing in a State of the Union address or some other major speech. Like I can think back of a couple of examples. Ronald Reagan, after the Challenger space shuttle blew up when I was in elementary school, right? Came on from the Oval Office and spoke to the American people about our spirit of discovery, the spirit of community and coming together, right? And so he identified principles in that speech: community, spirit of discovery, and things that we strive for and that we work hard to achieve. And he tried to heal the nation through his speech. Similarly, Ronald Reagan's farewell address to the nation, his last speech from the Oval Office, was talking about the idea of the United States being a beacon of a shining light on the hill, right? And that we need to stand up for these ideals of freedom and justice, principled argumentation. And he talked about in that speech how he was concerned that we were losing sight of what those principles really mean, and that people were starting to follow blind patriotism instead. And he was giving a cautionary tale to the country to say, hey, we need to focus on what it really means to project freedom and justice and so forth, and not just support America for America's sake. Barack Obama, when he was accepting when he was saying, hey, I'm now going to be the next president, he gave a speech where he said that we are no longer a red America and a blue America. We are the United States of America. We are no longer white America, black America, Asian America. We are the United States of America, right? He was speaking to a higher principle. You can imagine activists, trial lawyers using this type of speech in debating as well. And then public forum, those public policy frameworks, these are the types where the ideal examples of this in the real world would be what journalists are doing when they're writing articles, or when we're having a town hall meeting, doing exposés, documentaries, maybe not documentaries, that's maybe a bit too much in the weeds, but journalist town hall meetings and so forth. You're speaking to the masses in a little, not quite a principled stance like the Lincoln Douglas format would do, but more of just kind of evaluating things at a basic level that everyone can understand, hopefully, and move forward. So those are the format comparisons in the real world. And that's